Hey guys, this is Jonathan with Payroll Services bringing you your HR tip of the day. This one's going to be a little bit lengthy because we're going to talk about something that has multiple parts to it, and I don't want lots of different videos about this subject all out there for this one. It's kind of depressing at times. And that is the involuntary separation of employee, or AKA termination. First things first is you need to remember that most terminations do not occur because you have two guys swinging at each other and you fire them on the spot. It does happen, but most of the time you're going to be faced with tough situations where you have employees that are constantly doing things over and over and over, or you're going to get to a situation where you find out that something about that employee is not good for your organization and you're going to have to separate with them. So it may be a surprise to the employee, it may not be a surprise to the employee. The first thing I want to talk about is severance pay. Severance is not required in the state of Maryland. It would be basically up to the employer unless you have some type of agreement in place or you have some type of policy inside your employee handbook. Again, the employee handbook trumps a lot if it's not in state law, and then they're going to be looking at consistency as to what you do. Severance is dictated completely by you, and it could be done by a case basis. So if the employee was terminated just because they didn't do a good job or whatever the case is, and you want to give them 2 weeks pay or whatever the case is, you can absolutely do that. The big thing when you're talking about termination is whether it's going to be termination for cause or termination just because they stink at their job. There is a difference, and the reason why I'm pointing out those differences is because of unemployment purposes. You are going to have times where you're going to let somebody go because they just downright stink. Okay, in the sales, when we try to hire salespeople, they may be great people, great personalities, potentials there, but they're just not making it. And in that case, you're going to terminate them for non-performance. They just aren't good at their job. And in that case, they're going to be fully able to get unemployment and things like that. The other cases that you're going to have is for when somebody is violating handbook policy or for cause or misconduct. Those are items where somebody's always coming in late, they did something, they talked to your clients in a wrong way. Misconduct, areas that, if anybody looked at it, they'd be like, yeah, you screwed up and that's why you got fired. Those are the types of things that you want to be documenting throughout the employment of that employee, so that way when you do terminate that employee and they claim unemployment, you have a case to submit to say no, why they should not get unemployment. It may seem like a cold thing, but unfortunately with unemployment, as you get unemployment claims, your unemployment rate goes up, which ultimately means that you pay it out over the long period of time. So if you have 30 to 40 employees, it's going to get expensive real quick. So these are some of the things that we use to minimize unemployment claims and to document the proper way. The next thing I want to talk about is what they call exit interviews. Exit interviews may work well for large corporations. In a small company, they're really hard to do, and the reason is because you're letting somebody go. It's not necessarily a pleasant time, and a lot of times they may not necessarily be aware that they're going to get let go. So do your best. I don't necessarily say you must do an exit interview. You got to play it based off that employee. If you're letting that employee go because of performance, and you've coached them over and over and over, that might be an opportunity to get some feedback for you as the employer on what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. But you're not going to be able to do an exit interview for everybody. What it is important, though, to have is to make sure you have some type of checklist, even if it's just mental, on things that you need to go over once an employee is no longer in your office. That could be emails, changing the email address, getting rid of usernames so they can't log back in. You have to be careful with this because some employees, when you let them go, they're going to be professional about it. Others are going to be spiteful. So the other thing that we recommend is if you're going to let an employee go, you do it at the end of the day. And you kind of have some thought process in how you're going to plan this, because you want to make sure that if the employee does cause a disturbance, that it is outside of business hours or the damage is minimal, if that makes sense. So these are things that you want to think about when you terminate an employee. Outside of that, try to be as professional as possible. Try not to talk a lot. Okay? Human nature is try to comfort that person. You're not going to comfort them. You're letting them go. They're not having a job anymore. It is what it is. In the cases where I've had to let certain people go, we've had people where we've had to let go because of performance, that they weren't. It was just not a good situation. And in those cases, you're going to feel probably pretty bad about it. You know the impact of letting that employee go. But at the end of the day, the way that businesses have to think about it, especially small businesses, is you have a responsibility to your current staff, you have a responsibility to your family, you have a responsibility to your investors, and you have a responsibility to your clients to provide good service. And so that's ultimately what you want to remember when you do these things. Again, there's a lot of things that go in with termination. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and ask us your question or your situation. No two situations are the same, and every employee has to be handled a little bit different. I hope this was helpful. Again, if you have any questions, give us a buzz. Thanks a lot.